Okay, so we have swaps class today. It's from 2:30 to 5:30, and we have to do a hard stop at 5:30 because I think you guys have a guest lecture. Were you notified about that? Yeah. So 3 hours may not be sufficient to cover all the swaps because actually your swaps is supposed to be 2 classes. And since I think tomorrow don't have a class, I was asked to cover everything today, but I don't think that's possible. So if there's anything left over, we'll pick it up next weekend. Okay. Is that all right? Okay then. So before we start off with the swaps class, do you have any doubts from the FX class that you want clarified?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, ma'am. The question on in the FX class that we did, I had some doubts in that. So, is there a way that I can contact you or email you the question?
Is
It's
it
a
the
pretty lengthy
one
question.
oh the lengthy one? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have the answer for that. Let me just pull that up on my screen. Hang on. Yeah. Here. The answer's here. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So
Okay. I think my answer was a little wrong. If I can try solving it again, and if I don't get it, is there any way to get in touch with you?
yeah, you can. So this is my email ID. You guys can send your doubts or questions, and I'll do my best to answer them on time. Hang on, let me just type
Hi,
it
ma'am.
out.
When class started, ma'am?
Sorry,
Oh, class timing are 2:30.
2:30 to
Hello.
5:30. We didn't discuss anything yet. We were just talking about what do you say? What is today's topic, and if any doubts are there, how to clarify them. Something's wrong. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah.
Something's wrong with the chat window. Hang on. Nothing I sent seems to be going through right now. Let me try it again. Internet open. Okay, can you note it down? Okay, I can write it here, right? You guys can see the Excel sheet, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just write it here. So you can make a note of. Okay, so this is my email ID. This will be on today's recording for you to see as well. So just do this thing. 2 lakhs is what you had in rupees. So 1 lakh was your ticket cost. So you're left over with 1 lakh INR, right? So the market maker is now going to sell the Hong Kong dollars to you. So if he's going to sell, he's going to use the ask rate, which in this case would be 6, right? So for 1 lakh INR, you get this much Hong Kong dollars. Okay. Then from that, your cost of hotel, your expenses per day, your ticket, your gifts, will remove all of that. You'll be left over with this many Hong Kong dollars. Now, the market maker is going to buy the Hong Kong dollars from you. So, he's going to use the bid rate, which is 5. which then converts to this much, 5 into this much gives you this much INR. Is that clear? Okay. And also there was a question on your this one. Did you guys get this right? The NDF contract. So I had not put the directions and everything. So I just gave you the rate and I gave you the notional value of the PHP currency, right? So what we did is in the first leg, we bought the PHP for which we got this much GBP, right? Then what we did is we flattened out the PHP in the fixing leg at this rate, and then we got this much GBP back. So the difference of this much is your profit on the GBP. If you did it the other way around, if you bought GBP and sold PHP in the first leg and then you sold GBP and bought PHP, you would have realized a loss. How many of you got this correct?
Ma'am, done.
Okay. I wonder why my this thing is not working. Chat window. Anyway, you guys can hear me, right? Okay, so shall we get started with today's class then? It's working now. Okay. Yeah, guys. Okay. So let me just close this one now. So today's class is going to be about swaps. So what do you know about swaps? What are swaps? What's a, if generically, if you have to define a swap, like the term swap, how would you define it?
You replace something in place of a.
Replace something, yes. Okay, what else? Anyone else? Alok says interchange of interest rate. Yeah, that is more specific. I'm asking in a generic way, if you have to define what is swap, the term swap, what does it mean? So Nikhil said exchanging of something. Anyone else?
Exchange of instrument for a certain period of time.
Okay, that is again specific sort of when you're talking about financial instruments, right? Generically, if you say swap is you exchange one thing for another thing, correct? A general listing definition. When it comes to your financial instrument swaps, what is it? Swaps is nothing but exchange of cash flows based on the underlier. Okay, exchange of cash flows based on the underlier. So when you did your first commodities, I mean your futures and forwards class, what was a derivative was explained, correct? Yes or no? Not like but your generic can be barter exchange or okay. So you had a, derivative instrument called as swaps. What all can it be its underlier, or what can a underlier be for swaps? Someone said interest rates, which is correct. Okay, so we'll write that down.
Equities.
Yes, thank you. Equities, meaning your shares. What else? Is this it? FX, or in other words, we'll write it down as currencies. What else? Bonds, yes, but we can broadly classify it under something called as fixed income. Okay. Anything else? Commodities, yes, brilliant. Okay. These all can be your underlies for your swaps. So swaps is your exchange of cash flows based on the underlying instruments. Now, we are going to learn 4 types of swaps in this class, and these are the basic ones. The first one is called as interest rate swap. For short, it's called as IRS. Then you have something called as equity swaps. For short, it's called as EQS. Then you have something called as FX swap. And then you have the most famous one, which is called as credit default swap, or for short, it's called as CDS. Okay, is it clear till here for everyone? Yes or no? Yeah. So write this down before we start off with the class of. We'll start off with FX swap, which is the most simplest one of all the swaps. Okay. Let me know when you're done. Okay. Everyone's done? Okay. So write the heading down as FX swap. Couple, can you mute your microphone, please? Right. So, what could be the underlie for FX swap? Currencies.
Currency.
Yes, correct.
Currencies.
Currencies is the underlier for your FX swap. Your FX swap is a combination of two FX trades with the same trade date but different settlement date. Okay, and they are usually used, or FX swap is usually used for speculation purposes. Okay, we discussed that your derivatives are primarily used for speculation, hedging, and arbitrage. So FX swap is primarily used in a speculation purpose. Is everyone clear till here? Yeah. So looking at this, so the definition that we said is an FX swap is a combination of two FX trades with the same trade date and different settlement dates. Okay, so looking at this first FX trade here, what type of FX trade is this? We discussed types of FX trades in your FX class, right? If the trade date and settlement date are the same, what type of FX trade is it? Cash, correct. This is a cash. The second one, what type of FX trade is this? Tom, correct. So this one's got settlement date, trade date plus 1 day, and this one has the same settlement date as the trade date. So this one's a cash trade. This is the Tom trade. This whole bit here is called as the FX swap, a combination of two FX trades with the same trade date but different settlement date. Okay, so you can have a combination of a cash plus Tom, a cash plus spot, a cash plus forward, or you can have a Tom plus spot or a Tom plus forward, or a spot plus forward. Okay, so can someone tell me, if I have to make this FX swap as a combination of a cash plus forward, what will be the trade dates and the settlement dates?
Settlement date can be after 4th of September.
Okay, which
any
one?
day.
The first one or this one?
Second one, cash plus
Yeah.
forward.
So let's say this is 4th of September. So now this becomes a cash plus forward combination. Is that clear? Okay. If I change the settlement date to 2nd September, now it becomes what type of combination?
Tom plus forward.
Exactly. A Tom plus forward. Are we clear with what's an FX swap? Yes. So in this case, as a speculator, what I did was I was speculating. Looking at this, what am I speculating? What is my speculation here, guys? What have I speculated here when I did this particular FX swap? What was my speculation? Bullish on what? Saujanya, obviously it's a profit. When you look at it, you can make out it's a profit, right? But what was my speculation? Preeti, a bullish market on what currency? Obviously currency fluctuation, Prasad, but
GBP.
Anupam says the price will depreciate for euros. Has the price depreciated for euros here? Correct, Preeti. Euro would go bullish. Okay, that was my speculation. That's why I did this FX swap. Now, what you need to remember, like your NDF contract, where you don't first exchange 91,000 GBP versus this much euros, or the second time around you don't again exchange the GBP for the euros. What will happen is, on the settlement date, what they'll do, they'll net off, and whoever makes the profit is paid to them. Is that clear? Is this clear to everyone? So write down what's an FX swap, write down this example, and then write down the types of FX swaps that you can have, which is cash plus Tom, cash plus spot, cash plus forward, Tom plus spot, Tom plus forward, and a spot plus forward. Okay, let me know once you're done writing. Okay, everyone's done, right? So I can move on to the next swap. Yes, no, maybe. Okay. So the next swap that we're going to talk about is interest rate swaps. For short, it's called as IRS. What are the underlier, or what is the underlier for this type of swap? Correct. Interest rates. Okay. Now, when you look at interest rate means that someone has borrowed money, correct? On which interest is charged. Yes or no? Yeah. So when you look at interest rates, when you go to a bank, how many types of interest they can offer you if you borrow money from them?
Fixed and floating.
Exactly. You have something called as fixed interest rate, and you have something called as floating interest rate, or sometimes they refer to it as running interest rate. Okay. So what does fixed mean? Fixed means throughout the term of the loan, it is fixed. It does not change. So let's say I borrowed 1 million from the bank. The bank says annually I have to pay them 10% of 1 million. Okay. And when I have to return it, let's say maturity is 5 years. So in the span of 5 years, every year I pay 10% to the bank. That 10% does not change. That is called as fixed interest rate. Okay. What is floating? Floating interest rate is a prevalent market interest rate that is there in the market. Now that changes. It changes on a daily basis. It can change on a monthly basis. It can change on a weekly basis. Okay. Can you name some floating interest rates for me? Yes, Saujanya. LIBOR. What's the full form of LIBOR? What's the full form of LIBOR?
London Interbank Rate.
London Interbank Offer Rate.
Okay.
Okay. Is that the only one? Is that the only one you heard about, or have you heard of others? We have something
That's
called,
the
okay. So we have something called as Euribor, which is European Interbank Offer Rate. We have something called as MIBOR, which is your Mumbai Interbank Offer Rate. We have something called as TIBOR, which is Tokyo Interbank Offer Rate. Homework for you guys is find out the different interbank offer rates of different countries. Okay, so we named about 4, but there are a lot more. Okay, the homework for you is to find out the different interbank offer rates of different countries. Okay, now LIBOR is the prevalent globally used rate, but in fact it's going to become obsolete. So LIBOR is the globally used interbank offer rate. Okay. Now, how LIBOR came into existence was in the 1980s in the UK economy. There were a lot of banks that was to lend and borrow money, right? In your money market class, we learned about a particular money market instrument that is usually done between banks. Which is that? Intrabank? Is it intrabank, or intrabank is within the bank? There's a slight spelling mistake. It's interbank. Okay, it's interbank lending, right? So interbank lending is what? When one bank borrows money from the other bank for various purposes, it can be. But what would happen was one bank could borrow from another bank, and that bank that's loaning the money could charge interest based on what? Let's say if you were the loaning bank, principal, yes, but the percentage of interest, where would they derive that from? They could put whatever they wanted, you could say.
Oh, value
obviously
of the asset.
they would take into account certain factors, but let me put it this way. Let's say I want to borrow 1 million. I go to one bank and they say I'm going to charge you 4%. I go to another bank, they say I'll charge you 5%. So this 4%, 5%. So your various banks could charge various interest rates, right? Yes or no? Yeah. So in order to get a uniformity and have a benchmark rate, that's when the British Bankers Association came up with LIBOR. Okay. They said that they'll calculate a benchmark rate that people can use. So that, let's say now, if I want to borrow 1 million and I go to the bank and I say I want to borrow 1 million, how much interest you're going to charge me? And if the bank says I'm going to charge you 10%, but the prevailing LIBOR rate in the market is 5%, will I borrow from that bank? No, exactly. Because why? Now I have a reference rate or a benchmark rate to which I can compare to. Yes or no? Yeah. So that's how your LIBOR came into existence. Now, the thing is, I can show the calculation of how LIBOR is done, but it's going to become obsolete by the end of 2021. So, by end of 2021, LIBOR will be phased out and replaced by something called as alternate I'll get to why it will become obsolete. For short, it will be called as ARR. Okay. So, how LIBOR was calculated? Before we get to LIBOR calculation, write this bits down. Then I'll show you how LIBOR is calculated, and then I'll explain to you why LIBOR is going to become obsolete. Let me know once you're done writing.
Hello.
Yes, Nikhil.
Hello. Yeah,
Yes,
it's
Nikhil.
like a minimum rate set by the. Yeah, maybe it's by the minimum rate set by the
Banks.
BBA banks. Hello.
Yes, by the banks, Nikhil. Because otherwise, banks
Okay.
could charge whatever interest they wanted to anyone, right? To get a sort of
They can.
understanding. Let me finish. To
Okay.
get an understanding of what could be the base rate at which a person can borrow, they came up with LIBOR.
Okay. They can charge below also. It's up to them.
Yes, the banks can charge below LIBOR, they can charge above LIBOR, but within reason. Okay, it can't be drastically different. Like, let's say if the LIBOR rate is 3% and bank is saying I'll charge you like 7%, does that make sense? Unless the person is very desperate for the money. So every bank has to follow some clause. Like I explained, Nikhil, right? The benchmark rate will be LIBOR. You can add a percent more and charge the person, or you can like let's say LIBOR is 3%. So the bank can charge you an interest of, let's say, 3.5% or 4%. But not like if LIBOR is, let's say, 3% and the bank is saying, I'm going to charge you 8%. Does that make any sense? Would you then borrow from the bank? Exactly, right? So before that benchmark rate was not there, meaning a person now, if he goes to the bank, he'll say, okay, I want to borrow. And the bank says, I'm going to charge you 8%. But then this person doesn't know that the benchmark rate is, let's say, 3%. So to get that uniformity or this thing, to give a benchmark rate, the British Bankers Association came up with your LIBOR. Okay. Are you guys done writing? Okay. So how LIBOR is calculated is, confidentially, the BBA collects the interest a bank is willing to pay, or let's say, let me put this way, the bank is going to charge if another bank borrows. So let's say the question is on US dollars. It's going to lend US dollars. So it goes to 16 banks and asks them, if you're going to loan dollars to someone, what is the rate of interest you're going to charge? So first of all, give me 16 banks names. And keep in mind, we're talking about, this is going to be used globally. So this list has banks that are investment banks and banks that are retail banks. Okay, so give me some name of the banks.
Bank of America.
We have Barclays, yes. Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Okay, it merged.
Deutsche Bank.
JP Morgan, yes. Deutsche Bank. Nomura. Charles Schwab is not on this list, Chetan. But yeah, it is a bank. BNP, yes. SocGen, yes.
Citigroup.
Citigroup, yes. Sorry, someone mentioned something. Wells Fargo.
Standard Chartered.
Standard Chartered is a Singaporean bank and it's not on this list actually. Okay, so we have Barclays, yes. Bank of America is already mentioned. That's the second one. What else? That's it. Yes, thank you, Mithun. Royal Bank of Scotland. Yes.
HSBC.
Not HDFC.
Morgan Stanley.
HSBC, yes.
Morgan Stanley.
HSBC, Morgan
ABN
Stanley.
AMRO.
City is already mentioned, not ABN AMRO. Okay.
ABN
RBC also, Royal
Fargo.
Bank of Canada, not ANZ. Okay. So hang on, let's see how many we have here. How many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. I need 4 more.
Wells
GS,
Fargo.
GS is not on this list. Wells Fargo is also not on this list. Goldman is also not on this list. Rabobank is not on this list. We have your Dansk. Have you heard of these guys? This is a Danish bank. Okay, because the City Group, Archit, City Securities is a part of your City Group. Okay, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, brilliant. Yes, Credit Suisse. Then you have one called as Credit Agricole as well. Also, Bank of Tokyo. Lazard, no. Anupam. Okay, done. Not CLSA also, Archit. Okay. Now, what? It's a list that is published by the British Bankers Association as to which banks they would approach to get this rate. Okay, you can see it on Google. All right. Now, let's say hypothetically you are Barclays and the BBA says, okay, if you want to loan US dollars, what's the rate of interest you are willing to charge? So hypothetically, give me a rate. Okay, 8.7%. So next one, 5%. Next one, 7%. Next one, 9%. Next one, 3%. 6.5%. 8.5%. 9.75%. Some more rates. 4.78%. 8.4%. 5.8%. 7.89%. 6%. 6.75. 2.5, and lastly 7.8. Okay, so now what will happen is your British Bankers Association has confidentially collected this 16 rates from these 16 banks. Now what they'll do is they will cut off the top 4 and the bottom 4. Okay, so let's look at the bottom 4 rates first. So I'll highlight it in yellow. So we have 2.5, which is the next least one, 3%, which is the next least one, 5%, and then we have 6%. Correct, no? So these are the bottom 4 this thing.
5.80 is also there for
Sorry?
TMST.
5.80. Where is it? Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
And 4.78 is there for RBS.
Okay. Let me just remove this again and again. Okay. So 2.5 was 1. Okay. And then 3%. Yes. And then we said which one? 4.78, right?
Yes.
4.78. And then we have 5. Not 5.8. 5.8 is higher than 5, no? Correct? Yeah. Now the top 4. So what are the top 4 rates? We have 9.75 is 1, right? I'll put it in a different color. 9.75. Then we have 7.89.
8.70.
8.70. Where is it? I have a 8.4.
Barclays top one.
Oh yeah, there we go. and then 8.50 and 8.40. Correct? Shashi, can you mute your phone, please? Mute your mic, sorry. A lot of interruption. Okay? Agreed? So the top 4 and the bottom 4 are cut off, and what happens is the remaining is added and averaged. So the average is 6.97. So I'll write that the remaining rates are added and averaged. So in this case, the average became 6.97. Let me just check that again. Yeah. 6.97%. Now this is the LIBOR USD rate for, let's say, as of today. Similarly, they calculate the LIBOR rate for the other major currencies. What are the other major currencies that are there? Yes, GBP, JPY, Euro, and exactly CHF. Okay. Now they not only calculate the rate, let's say if you want to borrow dollars for just a day, which is overnight. Okay. They also ask if someone borrows for 1 week, how much it will be. Okay. Then for 1 month, then for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So if you're lending, let's say dollars for 1 day, how much will you charge? If you're loaning it for 1 week, how much you'll charge? 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So across 5 currencies and 7 periods or 7 tenurities, you could say. Okay. Is this clear on how LIBOR rate is calculated? Yeah. Now that you've understood how LIBOR rate is calculated, can I ask a quick question? Can, let's say, this guy and this guy discuss, is it always 16 banks on random? No, there's again that list of banks that I told you, right? These banks are referred to as panel banks, by the way. So all of these guys are referred to as something called as panel banks. And this list can change based on the British Bankers Association's decision. Okay? People can be kicked out of this list also. Didn't understand 1 week part. 1 week meaning, Saujanya, let's say if I am going to loan dollars to a person for 1 week, then how much interest I'm going to charge? If I want
6.9, right? So it'll be the same for all the months, whether it's 1 week.
No. This is today. If I'm only going to loan it to you for 1 day, I'm charging you 6.97.
Okay.
Okay, this will be the LIBOR rate for overnight, for 1 day. If I'm going to charge you for 1 week, that calculation has to, again, they'll take a confidential rate from all of these guys saying for 1 week, if you're going to loan, how much will you charge? They'll again calculate it and then publish it.
Okay.
It's not done every
So
week.
you mean to say that for different tenure there are different rates?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, for different tenures, there are different rates. Okay, what survey, Nikhil, are you talking about? Collecting these rates. It's not a survey. These rates are collected every day. Okay, so back to my question. Now that we know how LIBOR is calculated, can maybe this guy discuss with this guy and say, hey, listen, today I'll say that I'll loan at a rate of 5. You also say that you'll loan at a rate of 5. What is he trying to do basically here? So what is he trying to do basically? Illegal insider. It's not insider trading yet. Insider trading is you have information. This is basically he's saying, I'll say the same thing, you also say the same thing. What is he trying to do? What, sir?
He's trying to
influence, yeah, or rather you can say he's trying to fix the LIBOR rate. Yeah, so which technically shouldn't be done, okay, but it has happened. And who has done it is this bugger here. In 2012, Barclays ended up paying a fine for trying to fix the LIBOR rate. And the fine that Barclays paid was a total of $360 million. Small amount, right? Yes. Why? Yes, it's very huge. Out of this, 200 million was paid to the FCA. What's the full form of FCA? What's the full form of FCA? Come on, guys, you should know this by now. Guys, full form of FCA. I'll feel severely insulted if you don't tell me what is the full form of FCA now. Financial Conduct Authority. Yes, thank you. Financial Conduct Authority. Okay. And 160 million was paid to the US Federal Reserve. You might say, why the US Federal Reserve? Why? Because they are publishing US dollar rate also, which was used by the US market, so the US banks as well. Okay. So this happened in 2012. So then from 2012, what happened was ABA was removed from governing the LIBOR rate. Federal Reserve, Preeti, because they are publishing US dollar rates also, no? Which is used by the US markets as well.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, Nikhil. Before that,
Like,
let me just finish Preeti's this thing. Preeti, did you understand why the Federal Reserve they had to pay?
Okay. Yeah, you are telling that it is regulated USD rate as well. So how is this LIBOR connected to USD rate? I'm a bit confused here.
It publishes the USD dollar interbank offer rate as well, right? In US dollars, which was used by the US banks as well. So that was a fixed rate, right? Which created problems.
But LIBOR is the floating rate.
But it is how, if let's say I was a US bank, okay, and I have to loan money to a person who wants to take it at a floating interest rate. And the floating interest rate that I'm going to use is LIBOR USD rate. Who publishes it? The ABA or the BBA, sorry. The BBA publishes it. But who's using it? A US bank. Now the rate is
Okay.
fixed, which is then a problem,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Nikhil, what was your doubt?
just want to ask now, like Barclays had, you are saying Barclays doing the fixed income LIBOR rate, right?
Not fixed
So which
income.
bank
They tried to fix the LIBOR rate.
trying to fix the LIBOR rate with which bank, or like
Not with
the
which
bank they are fixing?
bank. They tried it with the British Bankers Association had outsourced the calculation to Thomson Reuters. So someone within Barclays was to speak to the Reuters guy and they fixed the rate. Because obviously
Okay.
this bank wouldn't know what this bank is charging for dollars, right? Because it was all confidential.
Right, right. The opposite bank is also charging any penalty, ma'am?
Why there was no? You mean Reuters? Reuters obviously was this thing charged a fine for getting involved in this fixing. Okay.
Okay.
How did they get to know it was this thing? Someone whistleblowed. You know what's the term whistleblowing, right? Yeah. So someone let them know that this is what is happening, and it was all blown out of the water, and Barclays got fined. Okay. So now before that, in 2008 itself, we had your that huge crisis, and then this LIBOR fixing scandal. So, on account of all of this happening, what happened is the one of the Financial Conduct Authority's head or chairman, you could say, he is the chief executive of the FCA. His name is Andrew Bailey. So in 2017, he made an announcement that by the end of 2021, then what will happen is all of your LIBOR will be phased out, and banks should come up with a alternative reference rate that they can use. Okay. Whistleblower profile is confidential. There is no set profile. There is no like how you have a, let's say, business analyst, which is a profile. You don't have a profile that says a whistleblower profile. Okay. Anyone can.
I meant to say that if I whistleblow about my company that
It'll be
something wrong
confidential.
happening,
Yes.
so if yeah,
It'll be confidential. No one will know that you're the person who told.
who blow the whistle? Who blow
Yeah.
the whistle?
Okay.
Okay.
So now, in place of LIBOR, so this is an FYI information. Instead of LIBOR USD, the new rate, or rather, let me put it this way. So we have the 5 currencies, which is USD, EUR, GBP, CHF, and JPY. So we had LIBOR, USD, Euro, GBP, CHF, and JPY that is published. So the alternate reference rate now in place of this, once your LIBOR gets phased out, is going to be, for USD it's called as SOFR, which is secured overnight financing rate. Okay. For UK or GBP, it's going to be something called as SONIA. Have you heard of this one? SONIA stands for Sterling Overnight Index Average. Okay. And then for euros, you have ESTR. Okay. Oh, sorry, wrong column. It goes here. For Swiss francs, you have something called as SARON, which stands for Swiss Average Overnight Rate. And then for JPY, you have something called as TONA, which is Tokyo Overnight Average Rate or average. Okay. And the regulators for your this alternate reference rate. So obviously for US it will be who will be the regulator? Yes, the Fed Reserve. Okay. For Europe, it's going to be who? European Central Bank, right? For GBP, it's going to be Bank of England. Okay. For Swiss francs, it's going to be the 6 Swiss exchange. And for JPY, it's going to be the Bank of Japan. Okay. Right. So are we clear with how LIBOR is calculated, guys? Okay. Although another one is almost ending this year. So end of next year, it will be phased out and they'll move to the alternate reference rates. Okay. Is this clear to everyone? Yes, no.
So basically, each one will have their own reference, right? So they've come out of that global one, and each one will make their own rules.
They will not use LIBOR anymore. Now everyone was dependent on LIBOR before for whether it was dollars, GBP, JPY, Euro, or CHF. Now it won't be dependent on LIBOR. So if let's say in the UK, a UK bank wants to borrow dollars. Before they would have looked at LIBOR USD rate that was published. Now, what's going to happen is instead of using LIBOR USD rate that is published, they will use the secured overnight financial rate that is published by the Federal Reserve. Okay. Preeti, ARR calculation is not decided yet, or rather that information is yet to be made public rather. Okay. So I just have this much information on ARR right now, which I decided to share with you guys. Otherwise, it's not part of your curriculum yet. Okay. So is everyone clear with how LIBOR is calculated and for what all currencies and what all rates? Okay. So LIBOR is an example of a floating interest rate. So we still haven't gotten into interest rate swap. Now that we have understood what is floating interest rate, let's get on to what is your interest rate swaps. All right. So let's say you have a person who wants to borrow $1 million and he goes to his bank. This is million only, right? Yeah. He goes to his bank and his bank offers him a fixed percentage of 3%, meaning you pay me 3%, whether it's annual. Let's say, for the sake of example, let's say it's annual payment. Okay. Now, what could be this fellow's risk if he borrows at 3%? What could be his risk? If floating is higher, will we be at a risk, Preeti? If the floating rate goes below 3%, then he'll end up paying more to the bank, correct? Yes or no? We're talking about this person only. His risk is, if he borrows at 3% now, he will end up paying, if the LIBOR rate is below 3%, he'll end up paying more to the bank. At the same time, you have this guy who also wants to borrow $1 million, but he wants to borrow it at a floating rate, and his bank offers him LIBOR plus 1%. Okay, what is his risk now? If the LIBOR rate goes above the fixed, or if the LIBOR goes above fixed, then he'll end up paying more. Does everyone agree with this?
Okay, I'm so sorry. This is so basic, but I am just getting confused here.
That's okay.
Bank A is borrowing. Bank
No,
A is
no,
not the
no, no.
investor.
No. Bank A is not borrowing. Client A wants to borrow $1 million from a bank.
So bank A is investor.
Is the lender.
Okay.
Is the lender. Okay, he's
That means investor.
not in. You could say investor, yes, because he's getting interest in return.
Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So, as discussed, A wants to borrow $1 million from a bank. His bank is offering him 3% fixed. His risk is, if the LIBOR rate goes below the fixed, he'll end up paying more. B is also in the same boat. He wants to borrow $1 million, but he wants to borrow at floating, and his bank is offering him LIBOR plus 1%. Now, his risk is if the LIBOR rate goes above the fixed. So what could happen is, both of these guys could help each other out by entering into something called as an interest rate swap agreement. So what will happen is, let me just illustrations. So they can enter into something called as an interest rate swap agreement, where A who has borrowed at a fixed from the bank in the interest rate swap agreement agrees to pay B LIBOR. Okay, and we'll plug in numbers and we'll see how this works. Okay, and B, who has borrowed at LIBOR, agrees to pay, let's say 2% to A. So this bit here is referred to as your interest rate swap agreement. So we'll plug in numbers and see what happens. Okay. So let's say, give me a LIBOR rate that is less than 3% and give me a LIBOR rate that is more than 3%. Okay, 1.5%, and when LIBOR is 4.5. Okay, let's take that. So here also remember, this guy is paying 3% to his bank. Okay, and this guy is paying LIBOR plus 1% to his bank. Okay, so let's see what happens now. Let's see A. Okay, A side, when LIBOR is 1.5%. Okay, first of all, he's paying his bank how much? 3%. Exactly. So 3% of a million is how much? How much is 3% of a million? 30,000. So I'll put it as a
30,000. 40,000.
30,000. Okay, I'll put it as a negative because he's paying. Okay, to bank A. Now in the interest rate swap agreement, okay, how much is he paying B?
15,000.
How much?
Sorry,
How much
what was
is
the question?
A paying B in the interest rate swap agreement?
If it's 1.5%, then it's 15,000.
1.5 plus, sorry, 1.5.
It will be
Correct.
25,000. Actually, 1% admitted.
No. Sorry, you're correct. He's paying LIBOR, which is 1.5. So how much is that? 15,000.
15,000. Yeah.
Okay, to B. But he's also receiving from B, right? How much?
2%, 20,000.
20,000. Correct. He's receiving 20,000 from B. So now if you add it up, how much is he paying totally? Which is less than 3% when you look at it.
2.5%.
Yeah, 2.5%. So we'll see from B's point of view now what happens when LIBOR is 1.5%. To his bank, he's paying how much?
25,000.
Yeah, which is 1.5 plus 1%. Okay, 25,000 to bank B. Also, he's paying A fixed of 20,000. Correct?
Right.
But he's also receiving
15,000.
15,000 from A. Right? So when you add this up now, let's see how much it becomes. Okay, it becomes 30,000. Now let's see, what was the other LIBOR rate? Hang on, Saujanya, you'll get it. Other LIBOR rate you told me to take into consideration was how much? Give me a round off number, it will be easier to calculate.
Ma'am, what is the benefit of B if entering into an IRS?
I'll tell you.
Because he's paying more.
I'll tell you. Hang on. Okay, give me a round of a 4. Okay, we'll take 4. So we'll take the same, this thing is point of view. Okay. So now to the bank, it's a fixed of 30. Okay. To B, it is LIBOR, which is 4%. Right? So LIBOR is 4%, he's paying 40. Okay. Plus, he is receiving 2%. Okay. So let's add this up again. Okay. And then let's take B's point of view as well. When LIBOR is 4%, he's paying his bank 4 plus 1, 5%. So that is minus 50,000. Agreed? Yes or no? Yeah. Plus, he is paying a fixed of 20,000 to A. But he's also receiving LIBOR, which is 4% here. So it is 40,000. Right? So now, when you add it up, okay. So let me just minimize. Can you still see this, guys? Even if I reduce the font a little bit? Yeah. So when you look at it now, when this guy's risk was if the rate went below 3. So when the rate went below 3, how much did he end up paying? Only 2.5. Correct? This was his risk. He's negated his risk. Yes or no? Yeah. Now this guy, regardless if the rate went up or down, he's paying what? A fixed of 3% now? Yes or no? Yeah. So this is how they have hedged their risk. Now you might ask question, hang on a second. When LIBOR was 4%, this guy is ending up paying 5%, which is more, right? Yes or no? Yeah. So what happens is, in actual reality, your fixed rate will generally tend to be higher than the floating rate. Okay. The fixed rate the banks charge will be generally higher than the floating rate. Okay. If that's the case, then this guy is covered. Yes or no? He's hedged his risk. Would you agree? Okay. Or he's reduced his borrowing cost. Okay. Saujanya, did it make sense? Or you want me to? I'm going to repeat it again. Okay. So pay attention, everyone.
Repeat it again, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat it again.
Okay.
So, as we said, we had, let's say, this guy wanted to borrow $1 million from his bank at a fixed rate, and his bank was offering him 3%. Preeti, I'll address your question in a little bit, okay? Now, his risk is if the prevailing floating interest rate will go below the fixed, he'll end up paying more to his bank. All right. On the other side, you have B, who also wants to borrow $1 million, but here's the catch. He wants to borrow at a floating rate of interest, and his bank is offering him LIBOR plus 1%. His risk is if the LIBOR rate goes above the fixed. So he's at a risk. So now both of these guys can enter into something called as an interest rate swap agreement to reduce their borrowing cost or hedge their risk. So what happens is the guy who's borrowed at fixed from his bank will agree to pay a floating, and the guy who borrowed floating from his bank will agree to pay a fixed. How is this arrived or derived? First of all, swaps is done on exchange or OTC.
Exchange.
No, Saujanya, your swaps are never done in exchange. It's always an OTC product.
OTC. Okay.
So you know your counterparty who you're dealing with. So that's how they discuss this. They'll arrive at these numbers by discussing with each other. Okay. Now, what we did is we took in hypothetical LIBOR rates to see what will happen. So we said, let's say LIBOR was 1.5%. Now, A, if he was not in the swap agreement, how much will he have to pay to his bank?
3%.
Yes, 3%. Okay. But because he entered into this interest rate swap agreement, in the end, how much he ended up paying?
He paid 1.5% LIBOR to client B and 2%. No, 1.5. And that 2% he gets it from client B. The fixed rate.
Exactly. Right. And then he just ended up paying only 2.5% when you add it all up together, which is less than 3%.
Oh. Yes.
Okay. So he's reduced his risk.
Yes.
Okay. B's side, what happened is we did the same calculations. Okay. He paid his bank the floating interest. Okay. Which was 1.5.
Ma'am, from B side, he gets a LIBOR of 1.5% from client A.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yes.
And then he gives 2% to client A, that is 20,000.
Yes.
And again, he pays LIBOR plus 1% to bank B.
Correct.
Which is a loss, so that's negative. So when you add all of them, it comes to 3%.
Yeah. Okay. And then we took another LIBOR rate and we did the calculations again.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing you notice is, regardless if the LIBOR rate goes up or down, this one still pays only a fixed of 3%. So you could say he's reduced his borrowing cost. Yeah. Now this guy, his risk was if the LIBOR rate is below the fixed. So we saw now when it went below the fixed, he only ended up paying so much. If it goes above fixed, he might be in a slight problem where he will have to pay more. But in the prevailing market conditions, what happens is usually your fixed rate will be more than the floating rate. Okay. So now in essence, this guy has gone from paying a floating rate to paying a fixed rate. Okay, and this guy, instead of paying a fixed rate, now he's gone to paying a floating rate. Yes or no? Agreed or not agreed? Yeah?
Ma'am, so in the second scenario, since it's 5%, he would rather go to fixed rather than go for LIBOR, because LIBOR he has to pay 5%.
No. He is paying the 5% ultimately because he's already entered into the interest rate swap agreement.
Okay.
It's not like you get a choice here. Okay, if I do this calculation right now, I'm paying 5%, which is more than the 3, so I'm going to back out. No, that can't happen. Then you have defaulted on your interest rate swap agreement.
So you mean to say that in any scenario we have to honor the contract?
Yes, otherwise there will be backlashes on it. Okay. Done? Or understood?
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, Anupam.
So in case one, how is B hedging his risk? Because LIBOR plus one would be 2.5%, but he is ending up paying 3%.
Yes, but then when you look at it, even if the LIBOR goes up or down, because it's not just a one-time payment he's doing, right? It's going to be over a period of, let's say, maybe 5 years or 10 years. Okay.
Okay.
So the LIBOR rate will go up or down. Regardless if it goes up or down, now he's only going to be paying a fixed. You put in a higher LIBOR rate and put in another lower LIBOR rate, do the calculations and see. It'll always be fixed. He'll end up
So it's based on the long-term payment cycles, not just one time.
Yeah, I mean, your interest rate swaps are never a short term this thing. It's for like maturities of like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, which I'm going to get to this thing. Have we understood the basics of interest rate swaps now? Yes?
Yes, ma'am, it is clear, but I want to add one question to the last one.
Mm-hmm.
As you said that fixed rate are always like there will be more chances that case one will be there.
Sorry, what?
Like,
Repeat your statement, Preeti. I didn't understand what you said. What I said was usually the fixed rates that are the banks are charging tend to be higher than the floating rate that is in the market.
yeah. So fixed rate is always higher.
Yes.
That means how B is able to hedge the risk? That was my question actually. Because if LIBOR is 1.5,
LIBOR now when it was 4, which was above the fixed.
yeah, but that will be when it is going to rise above fixed price. But you are
Yes.
telling that in real condition, it will always be like the fixed price will always be higher.
Huh.
So why B will get into this agreement?
Because when I say higher, in this example, I give drastic difference. It's not going to be so much different. It will be like decimal difference will be there.
Okay.
But because the amount that is borrowed is higher, I gave 1 million as an example. But in reality, on 1 million, no one does an interest rate swap. An interest rate swap will be done on values such as 10 million, 100 million, 200 million. So even 1% of 200 million is a lot, right? Interest.
Yeah, right.
Right? So to reduce their borrowing cost or hedge their risk, they can enter into an interest rate swap agreement.
Actually, I still don't understand. It is beneficial for A, but how is it beneficial for B?
I'll get to that with the next example when we're talking about how these guys would enter into a swap agreement. It's not like they know each other, right? And it's not like as if this guy is going to stand on the road and, hey, I want to borrow at fixed. I want to reduce my borrowing cost. Who wants to enter into an interest rate swap agreement? Correct?
Okay.
So the middle
Yeah.
person there will come into picture, which I will explain to you in a little bit. Have you understood the basics though?
Yes, yes.
Okay, guys.
And one last One last question, ma'am. So basically, they enter into a contract, and the LIBOR rates will definitely. You're trying to say it will change over time, right? So they end up paying like
LIBOR rate will change every day, na?
every day. So they end up paying the LIBOR fluctuations. So that's what you just took two cases where first time he may pay 2.5%, but he may end up again paying 5%,
Yes.
right? So those fluctuations
Yeah.
happen.
Those are the scenarios
Oh,
that I've given you.
okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem. Right. So how long will it take you guys to write this? Or because the recording will be sent, do you want me to continue? Because it's almost 4. I just have 1.5 hour left and I still have to cover another half of interest rate swap, then equity swap and credit default swap. What do you guys want to do? Will you wait for the video recording and then take down notes, or you want to take down notes now? Taken a screenshot. Okay. Faster way of doing it, Saujanya. Right? Otherwise, also there's guys. Let me know na quickly what you want to do. Do you want me to continue, or do you'll wait for the recording and then you can take down notes based on reviewing the recording again? Continue. Okay. So there are a couple of rules when you want to enter into an interest rate swap agreement. Okay. The rules are, so it's used for hedging and reducing borrowing costs. Okay. Criteria to enter into a interest rate swap agreement. 1, currency has to be the same. Second, notional has to be the same. Okay. So here you've noticed it's dollars. Here also it is dollars. So this can't be dollars and this can't be euros. Okay. It has to be the same currency. Also, 1 million, 1 million. So this can't be 1 million and this can't be 2 million. Otherwise, you cannot enter into an interest rate swap agreement. So in order to enter into an interest rate swap agreement, the currency and the notional has to be the same. Is everyone clear with this? Yeah. Okay. Then you have types of interest rate swaps. You have something called as the vanilla IRS, where in the interest rate swap agreement, it can be fixed versus floating interest rate or vice versa. So this is an example of a vanilla interest rate swap. It's a fixed or floating versus fixed or fixed versus floating. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah. Then you have something called as basis IRS, where it's floating versus floating. Okay. Floating versus floating interest rate. So, for example, let me just copy this bit. Instead of, let's say, this is Euribor USD plus, let's say, 1%. Okay. This is LIBOR USD plus 1%. So that means what has happened is A wants to borrow dollars, but at the Euribor dollar rate that is published by Euribor. Is everyone clear with this? Okay. This one's risk is if the LIBOR rate is less than the Euribor rate. This one's risk is if the Euribor rate is less than the LIBOR rate. Okay. This is an example of a basis interest rate swap. The floating versus floating. Again, notice the notional and the currency is the same. Okay. Is this clear? Is this clear, guys?
In this example, I want to ask, instead of taking directly another swapping, why they are just doing this agreement? Like the client B would have taken this another one, CURIBOR, this QBOR. Okay, so client B would have taken QBOR and client A would have taken directly LIBOR. Why they are doing this, entering into this contract of swapping?
No, they're not directly taking. This is the swap that they're doing. What they've done is client A, let's say from a European bank, he's borrowed dollars. So they're charging him Euribor dollar rate plus 1% as interest. Okay. This guy, let's say, is borrowed at from, let's say, a UK bank. He's borrowed dollars. And that bank is charging him LIBOR USD plus 1%. Okay. Now, this guy's risk is if the Euribor dollar rate will go above the LIBOR dollar rate. Vice versa for this fellow.
Okay.
So, in order to reduce their risk, they enter into a basis interest rate swap. So, ultimately, when you look at it, this guy is paying Euribor plus 1, but he's also receiving Euribor from this guy, right?
Okay, yeah, right.
And this guy is paying LIBOR plus 1, but he's also receiving LIBOR from this guy, right?
Okay.
So they're reducing, you can plug in numbers and see what happens. But now you'll have two rates. You'll have a Euribor rate and you'll have a LIBOR rate.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and that's Euribor, EURIBOR, right?
Yeah, European Interbank Offer Rate. So like how
Okay, thank you.
LIBOR publishes rates for dollars, GBP, CHF, similarly European banks also publish, or the European Central Bank also publishes, if bank wants to borrow dollars, what's the interest rate they'll charge? If bank wants to borrow GBP, what's the interest rate they'll charge, etc.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we okay with what's a vanilla interest rate swap and a basis interest rate swap?
Ma'am, I have doubt, ma'am. So in the place of USD, we can put euro also, no?
Yeah, then this will change, no? This will become Euro 1 million. This will also be Euro 1 million. And this will be,
Okay, yeah.
it will be Euribor Euro and this will be LIBOR Euro.
Like currencies are the same, ma'am, right?
The currency and the notional has to remain the same for an interest rate swap agreement. Otherwise, you cannot enter into an interest rate swap agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is everyone clear with this? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. So, as I was saying, we're talking about this guy, they both want to borrow at a fixed or floating, but then they want to reduce their borrowing cost or hedge their risk. How they'll do it It's not like they're going to stand on the road and say, hey, I'm borrowing money, I'm borrowing it fixed, I want to enter into an interest rate swap agreement. Anyone out there who wants to enter? No. Who helps them? Any guesses?
Over the counter, they
Investment banks, exactly. Who helps them is the investment bank. So let's switch it up a bit. Okay. So let's say you have again client A who wants to borrow $1 million. His aim is to borrow it at floating rate. So he goes to his bank, let's say Chase Bank. Chase Bank offers him a fixed of 8% and a floating of LIBOR plus 1%. Clear so far? Okay. Now his aim is floating. If he goes for floating, which is LIBOR plus 1%, what could be his risk? What could be his risk if he goes for floating? The floating rate will go up. Exactly. Thank you, Sojan. That is his risk. Okay. So what he does is he goes to the investment bank and he says, help me out here. I want to borrow $1 million and my bank is saying this. They can charge me a fixed of 8 or a floating of LIBOR plus 1. But here's my thing. If I go for floating, my risk is if the rate goes higher, then I will lose out. Or I will end up paying more. So what the investment bank does is, it says, no problem. You do one thing. Instead of going for floating, you pay a fixed of 8%. With me so far? You pay me you pay your bank a fixed of 8%. What I'll do for you is I'll give you 8%, but I'm expecting something in return. You pay me LIBOR. Clear till here? This becomes an interest rate swap with the investment bank. Okay. So I'm going to repeat it. Client A, 1 million. Aim is to go for floating. Bank is offering floating of LIBOR plus 1. Risk is if LIBOR goes above fixed, he'll end up paying more. Goes to the investment bank and says, okay, help me out here. So what the investment bank says, do one thing. Don't borrow at floating. You borrow at fixed. What I'll do for you is, I'll pay you that fixed. In return, you pay me the floating, which is LIBOR. Everyone clear till here? Now, on the other side, you have client B. He also wants to borrow $1 million and he wants to borrow it at fixed. He goes to his bank, let's say Bank of America. Bank of America says, I can offer you a fixed of 10% or I can offer you a floating of LIBOR. Okay. So if he goes for fixed, which is 10%, his risk is what? What is his risk? If the LIBOR rate goes down below the fixed, he'll end up paying more. So again, he goes to the investment bank and says, help me out here. I want to borrow at fixed, but this is my dilemma, this is my problem, or this is my risk. So the investment bank says, do one thing. Instead of borrowing at fixed, you borrow at floating, which is LIBOR. Okay. What I'll do for you is, sorry, I'll pay you LIBOR. Obviously, I want something in return, correct? So you pay me, let's say, 8.5% of fixed interest, which is better than you paying your bank 10%. Agreed? Yeah. This is the other interest rate swap agreement. Okay. Now, look at this bugger. He's receiving 8.5. He's paying this guy 8. So he's making a nice profit of 5.5%. Yes or no? Yeah. He has to pay this guy LIBOR, but where is he getting the LIBOR from? Exactly. So now we'll do one thing. We'll plug in various LIBOR rates, right? We'll do one LIBOR rate less than 8%, one between 8 and 10%, and one about 10%, and see the calculations on both sides. What happened? So give me a LIBOR rate less than 8% and give me a round off figure so it will be easier for calculation. 6, okay. 6%. Okay. So now let's see A's side. First of all, A is paying a fixed of 80,000 to Chase. Okay. Now in the interest rate swap agreement, he is paying LIBOR to the investment bank, which is 60,000. Agreed? Yes or no? Yes or no, guys? Yeah. Plus, he is receiving what? A fixed of 80%. Or sorry, 8%, not 80%, which is 80,000 from IB. So, how much we end up paying? 60,000. Yes or no? Yeah. Let's take B's side now. Now, B is paying LIBOR to his bank. How much is LIBOR? 60,000. So I'll copy that here. To Bank of America. Okay. But he's also receiving 60,000 from the investment bank. Correct? Or rather, let me put it this way. We'll write the deductibles first. He's paying a fixed of 8.5% to the investment bank, which is minus 85,000. But he's receiving LIBOR, which is 60,000 from the investment bank. Yes or no? Right? So add it up. How much does it become? Minus 85,000. Okay. Now give me a LIBOR rate between 8 and 10. 9. Okay. So Chase, it is again fixed of 80,000, correct? He is receiving 80,000 from the investment bank, and he's paying LIBOR, which is minus 90,000. Okay. So how much is he paying now? Minus 90,000. Correct? Agreed? Yes or no? Guys. Yeah. So now B is paying the bank LIBOR, which is minus 90,000. Okay. He's paying a fixed of 85,000 to the investment bank, but he's receiving 90,000 from the investment bank. Okay. So minus 85,000. Okay. So one last LIBOR rate greater than 10. How much? LIBOR rate greater than 10, guys. 11. Okay. So again, fixed to the bank, right? Receiving a fixed from the investment bank, paying LIBOR, which will be minus 110. Yes or no? Yeah. So minus 110. Yeah. B side now. Paying LIBOR to the bank. So 110 to the bank, right? Paying a fixed of 8.5 to the investment bank, but receiving LIBOR, which is plus. Okay. So ultimately, now, what was this guy's aim? To borrow it floating. Yes? Yes or no? Yeah. So now, ultimately, what is he doing? He's paying a floating loss. How is it loss? His aim was to pay floating. Isn't he paying it floating? If he borrowed at floating here, and if it went above this thing, he'd had to pay LIBOR plus 1%. Meaning, let's say now, if it went above 8%, which was 9%, he would have to pay 9 plus 1%, which is 10%. But has he paid 10% now in this scenario? Did you understand the question? What was his aim? His aim was to go for floating. Bank was saying LIBOR plus 1. LIBOR is 9%. He would have to pay the bank 10%. But ultimately now, because of this interest rate swap agreement, he is paying what? 9%. Yes or no? Which is less than the 10% if he directly borrowed it floating from the bank. Yes or no, guys? Yeah. Also, his aim was to borrow it floating. Now, regardless if the LIBOR rate was 6, 9, 11, isn't he paying a floating? Yes or no? Similarly, this guy's aim was fixed. Regardless if the LIBOR rate went up or down, what has happened now? He's paying only a fixed because he's entered into this agreement. Is this clear? So your person who gets involved is your investment bank, and he makes a nice spread in between, right? Okay. Please understand, notionals are not exchanged here. In order to enter into an interest rate swap, the notional and currency has to be the same. But at no point in time the notionals are exchanged. Does it make sense in exchanging the notionals here? It's only the exchange of the cash flows based on the interest rates. Is everyone clear with this aspect now? Notional is principal, you could say, yes. Okay. Right. Again, I'll leave you guys to look at the video recording again to take down notes. If you want to take a screenshot, take a screenshot. But are we clear with what is interest rate swap agreements? Yeah. We don't have this swap in India. In fact, we don't have swaps in India at all. Derivatives in India is primarily your futures, options, forwards. We don't have any swaps. They didn't come up with it in the market yet. Yes, according to economical this thing, we're still on the development stage, so probably it will take time. Okay. Right. Can I continue? Give me 2 minutes to drink water and then we'll move on to equity swaps. Yep. Okay.
You are going on saying minus.
Okay. Right. So the next swap that we're going to talk about is equity swaps. And what are the underliers for this? Exactly. Equities. Okay. This swap is slightly confusing. It's not that confusing, but slightly confusing. Okay. So, is the screen visible? So let's say we have fund A, which is an equity fund, and they have about 1 million worth of equity. And to track the performance of that equity, it tracks the Standard and Poor index. Right? Can you name someone the indexes for me? Nifty, Dow, yes, these are all indexes. Okay. NYSE is a stock exchange, Nikhil. Sensex, yes, this is also an index. Okay. So this fund, this tracking, let me rephrase it. This fund, which is having equities and tracking the Standard and Poor index, is speculating the index is going to perform badly or negatively. Okay, the index can perform positively or negatively. With me so far? Yeah. On the other hand, we have Fund B, which is a fixed income fund. Okay, that's also got 1 million worth of securities, and annually they're getting, on an average, let's say the interest that they're earning is 2%. With me so far? Okay, and this fellow is speculating that the stock index will perform positively. The guy
Ma'am,
who's
I have a question.
huh,
We are dealing in equities fund, so how come fixed income funds are coming in between? I'm confused in this.
I'll get to that point, no, Preeti. This is one separate fund, this is another separate fund.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if this guy is holding fixed income, he's still speculating that the stock index is performing positive. Do you absolutely need to hold equities or the underlying securities to do a speculation? No, it's not absolutely required for you to hold the underlier. Okay. So, although this guy is having fixed income, he's speculating the stock index will perform positive. Now, this guy, to hedge his risk, and this guy, because he's speculating, can enter into something called as a equity swap agreement. Okay. Or equity default swap. No, not sorry. What's wrong with me? Equity swap agreement, EQS. Okay. So there can be two scenarios. Either the index performs positive or the index performs negative. Yes or no? Yeah. So let's take the first scenario where the index performs positive. If the index performs positive, this fellow's speculation went wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So now what will happen is this fellow will have to pay this guy something called as the positive on S&P, and we'll plug in numbers and show how it happens as I'll have to write it. Okay, positive performance on S&P. Now, obviously, this one will want something in return. Fund A. Yes or no? Yes or no, guys? Will it only be that he'll pay him? He'll want something in return. So, because it's an OTC product, we'll discuss, and in the equity swap agreement, this fellow will say, okay, if you're giving me the positive performance, I'll pay you 1% fixed. Okay, so this is one scenario where if the index performs positive, The guy who's tracking the index and who's holding the equities, his speculation went wrong because he was speculating it won't perform well. In that case, he has to pay the positive performance on the index to B. In return, B pays a fixed percentage of 1%. With me so far?
Ma'am, please repeat.
Sure. Fund A, that is having equities, is tracking S&P stock index and is speculating the index will perform bad. On the other hand, you have fund B, that's a fixed income fund. He is speculating that the stock index will perform good. This guy, to hedge his risk, fund A, to hedge his risk, and fund B, because he's speculating, can enter into something called as an equity swap agreement. Where now, the first scenario is if the index performs positive, fund A speculation went wrong. So as per the agreement, he has to pay something called as a positive on the index, which I'll show you in numbers in calculation. Okay. On the other hand, in the agreement, he wants something in return. So he gets, let's say, 1%, which is the agreement between the two of them. Is that clear now, Saurabh?
Got it now.
Okay. Now, the next scenario. If the index performs negative, that means this fellow's speculation turned right. Yes or no? Yeah. So now this fellow doesn't pay anything to this guy, but this guy now has to pay that 1% plus the negative on S&P. Okay, and again I'll show you in calculations how this is. One question might run through your head is, hang on a second, when it's positive it makes sense, he pays positive, he receives a fixed. But when it's negative, why is it that this guy is paying nothing, but this guy has to pay him that fixed plus the negative? That would be a question, yes? That's how the product is structured. I didn't invent the product. Okay. Equity swap is just structured in that way. All right. These are called structured products as well. That's another whole different terminology that is used. Okay. So I'm going to plug in numbers and we'll see what happens. So let's say this bit here will be called as your equity swap index. Okay. Let's say at the time of entering the swap agreement, your S&P was at 1000 points. You know your index, they denote by points, right? Yes or no? Okay, points. So now let's say at the first reset or the first exchange of cash flows, S and P is at 1200 points. So is this a positive performance? Yes. So if it's a positive performance, that means A will now have to pay B. How much? We'll calculate that. So how to calculate the positive performance? It will be your 1200 minus 1000 divided by 1000. Okay, which is this much percentage. Yes or no? Yeah. So 20% of what? 20% of how much? Yes, 1 million, which is what A will now pay to correct? In return, B will pay how much? Yes, B will only pay 1% of 1 million. B will pay to A. Okay. Now, let's say S and P is 1,100 points. Okay, is this a positive or negative performance? Positive, positive,
Positive by
positive,
positive by 10%.
positive. Wrong. You don't see from here because we've already done one calculation, right? We see from the previous listing. So from here, is it positive? It's negative, right? So now, if we do the calculations for the negative percentage, right? This 8% will be paid by who now? Exactly. 8% plus the 1%. What is the agreement? If the index performs negative, I will pay you nothing, but you will pay me the negative plus the fixed. B pays to A. Is this clear? How will A pay positive, Preeti? The index has performed negative, right? From here to here, index has performed negative. So in this scenario now, A pays nothing to B. Instead, he receives the fixed plus that 8% negative from B, meaning 8%. 9, total 9%. Yes. Okay. Is this clear? Is this clear, guys? Okay. Now, like your interest rate swap, to enter into equity swap, the principal or notional has to remain the same and the currency has to remain the same. Okay. The principal and the notional have to remain the same and the currency also has to remain the same. So, criteria for, I'll write it here. Currency same and notional same. Is this clear? Okay. Now, the reason why it's called as equity swap is because one side always tracks a stock index. Okay, one side will always track a stock index. The other side can be fixed income or it can be equities but tracking another stock index. Did you understand? Or you want me to repeat? It's called as an equity swap because one side always tracks a stock index. Okay. The other side can be fixed income or it can be equities tracking another stock index. So, for example, I'll put it down because I can't see. The other screen is covered. So we said this one's tracking S&P. So we'll change this now. We'll make this also an equity fund. Okay, 1 million. So instead of S&P now, obviously, let's say it tracks Dow Jones, which is another stock index. Okay. So now this one speculating that S and P will do what? Perform positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative, exactly. Will perform negative. But he's also speculating that Dow Jones will perform positive or negative.
Positive.
Exactly. He speculates that Dow Jones will perform positive. Okay. This arrow is theta. Let me try to fix it. Okay. Now, this guy is obviously speculating the other way now. So this guy's speculation is what? That S&P will perform positive or negative? Not negative. S&P will perform positive. This guy is speculating the other fund will perform positive, but he's speculating his own fund, which is tracking Dow Jones, is going to perform negative. Clear? Okay, so I'm going to repeat it. This one's tracking S&P, speculating S&P will perform bad, but Dow Jones will perform good. This one's tracking Dow Jones. He's speculating that S&P will perform good, but Dow Jones will perform bad. Clear to everyone? Yeah. So if we do it as per the previous thing, if this guy is tracking S&P, if S&P performs positive, he'll pay the positive to the other guy. Yes? Yes or no? Yeah. If S&P performs negative, he'll receive the negative from the other guy. Correct? Yes or no? Okay. So now this guy is tracking Dow Jones. So if Dow Jones performs negatively, will he pay or will he receive? If Dow Jones performs negatively, will he pay or will he receive? He will receive, correct. He's going to receive plus if it performs positively, then he will pay. Exactly. In this case, there is no fixed because this is not a fixed income fund or a fixed income. It's not holding fixed income instruments. This is a equity versus equity, but tracking different indexes, but the notional and currency is the same. Is this clear to everyone? Preeti, I just said no, there is no 1% because this is not versus a fixed income like the previous one. This is equity versus equity. If it was a fixed income, then that 1% will be there. Okay. Is this clear to everyone? Yes. Okay. So, can I move on to CDS then? Okay, so the last bit that we have is your credit default swaps. Okay, for short, it's called as CDS. So, let's say you have an issuer, company A, who, let's say, issues a bond. Okay, we'll call it bond A. Again, to keep the value simple, let's say it's worth about 1 million, or the principal is 1 million. 5% annual interest, 10-year maturity. Okay, we have investor A who's interested to invest in this bond. That means what the investor does is he pays company A $1 million. Okay, in return, what will happen? In return, what will happen, folks? If he pays, he'll get the bond. Correct. Investor gets the bond and is paid 5% of 1 million annually. Yes or no? Till the maturity. Correct? Agreed? What's the risk now? What's the risk that these guys or this investor is facing? Increase in interest rate in the market. Yes. What else? Default in payment. Thank you, Divya. What else? Company can go bankrupt? Yes or no? So default in interest payments or company can go bankrupt. This is the risk that the investor is facing. So in order to reduce his risk, he goes to the investment bank and says, let's enter into a credit default swap agreement. Okay, or rather, the investment bank tells the investor, listen, here's your risk, I'll help you hedge the risk. Let's enter into an interest rate swap agreement where, let's say, you receive 5% annually from the interest from the bond, right? Out of that 5%, how about you pay me about, let's say, 2%, okay? Maybe annually again. This is between them, the agreement. In return, what I'll do for you is, I'll pay you an agreed amount on default. Whose default? Exactly. On company's default. So this becomes your CDS agreement. Okay. Now, is the investor at a risk? Or has he hedged his risk, you could say? If there is no default from the company, he'll keep on receiving the interest, right? Till the bond matures and he gets his 1 million back. If there is a default from the company, this guy now has agreed to pay a certain amount. So his risk is covered essentially. Agreed or not? Yeah. So this guy here in a CDS agreement is referred to as a protection buyer. Okay. This guy is referred to as a protection seller. Okay. This person is referred to as a reference entity, and this is referred to as a reference obligation. Okay. So now that I've explained what is a credit default swap, can you define what is a credit default swap, including these four terms: protection buyer, protection seller, reference entity, and reference obligation? Take a minute and can you define it for me? A definition of a credit default swap. Let me make a nice this thing. You'll get one chance to give me the definition. Okay. And if it comes close to having all the required points, I'll tell Rakshit to add, let's say, 2 more points on your Viva score. Protection biotics, protection for reference entity, for reference obligation.
Ma'am, if that is the case, let me take some.
Okay.
If you get okay.
Okay,
Hello.
Saujanya, because you typed just as it's finishing, you will get one more chance. But the rest of you, only one chance. If
Okay.
it has all the points or comes close to having all the points, I'll tell Rakshit to add 2 points on your next Viva score. And since in the interest of time, I only have about 34 minutes left. So those of you who want to take a shot at it, be quick. So Anupam's given a try. He says a swap between a protection buyer and protection seller where the risk of the buyer is hedged in case the reference entity defaults on the underlying reference obligation. Close. Couple of things are missing from it. So Anupam's chance is gone. In this contract, so Nikhil says in this contract, protection buyer sign a contract with protection seller for hedging the risk in underlying reference obligation. Again, something's missing. So Nikhil's chance is also gone. Okay. This 2% can also be referred to as what? It can be referred to as premium. Anyone else wants to take a chance? Yes, no, maybe.
Ma'am, I thought you were only supposed to include those 4 major terms.
But you're missing this thing, key important points, right? Protect. Okay, Saujanya says. Yeah, Saujanya says the protection buyer takes protection against default or credit events in the reference entity. Close, but still something's missing. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm trying to frame a sentence. Just give me like 30 seconds.
Okay. So Divya says CDS is a swap which protects the investor from default risk by in reference entity at a predetermined rate premium. Again, something's missing. A lot of stuff is missing actually, Divya.
Ma'am, for my sentence, please add the swap agreement. So it's an agreement where that one I just missed out in the sentence.
No, you're missing out a couple of other things. So Divya's chance is also gone. Anyone else wants to take a whack at it, or should I give the definition? Preeti says, when a protection seller ensures credit bought by protection buyer with premium, that is reference obligation issued by reference entity. Preeti, you confuse me more. Okay, nice try though. But one thing is the structure. Even you're confused. Okay. I'm going to close out the chances now because I have to explain still quite a few stuff on this. So here's the definition. Okay, I'll write it down in the chat. So CDS is an agreement where the protection buyer pays premium or premiums to the protection seller. In return, the protection seller pays an agreed amount if the reference entity defaults on the reference obligation. There. So it has all the terms and this thing, right? So CDS is an agreement where protection buyer pays premium or premiums to the protection seller. In return, the protection seller pays an agreed amount if the reference entity defaults on the reference obligation. Yeah? Agreed? Okay. So, now, what constitutes as defaults? So, one obvious one is bankruptcy, which I spelled incorrectly. Okay. Bankruptcy. And you all know what is bankruptcy, right? Do I need to explain it? Yes or no? Yeah. Next is something called as moratorium. Have you heard of this term? Moratorium? Yeah. What is moratorium, Anupam?
It's in a nutshell, it's a period in which the amount can be paid back.
Or in other words, in this case, it's a period where they'll put stop on certain payments for a certain bit of time. So let's say if the company or company A, for example, right now is planning to merge with another company. So for the time being, it might say, I am not going to pay the coupons. So they put a stop on the payment of the coupons. Okay. Another example can be, let's say if one company takes over the other company and the target company had issued bonds. Now the company that's acquired the target company might tell, I am not going to pay the coupons on the bonds that they have issued. That also can be an example of moratorium. Okay. Then another constitutes or what another this thing is restructuring. So restructuring is nothing but if the company decides to, again, merger is sort of like a restructuring, but within the company, if it's planning to restructure, it might decide to temporarily not do any payments. Okay, so that also is considered as a default in a credit default swap. Is that clear? Okay. So,
Ma'am, the question is, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, the question is in the second and third example, where the company gets acquired by any other company, the principal amount, which is 1 million over here, is safe, right? Is fixed,
yes.
which is going to be paid to the investor A back.
Yeah, but
right?
the coupons can.
So where's this insurance comes?
No. That is, he's putting a stop on the payment, right? For certain amount of
On
time.
the coupons.
On the coupons, yes. So that is considered as a default in a credit default swap agreement. It will be outlined in the agreement.
But how does it work in this swap agreement when it comes to the insurance which is getting?
So don't call it insurance, please. That will just
Sorry, the agreement. The agreement.
So let me put it this way. Let's say you are the investor. Okay. You got the bond. Okay. In the fifth year, the company makes an announcement saying that I will not pay coupon for the next 3 years. With me so far?
Okay.
Okay. Now, as per the CDS agreement, what is outlined is I'll pay an agreed amount on default. When the company made that announcement that it's not going to pay the coupons for the next 3 years, that is constitutes as a default.
Okay.
So then IB has to pay some amount of agreed amount to this guy.
So out of this, these 5%, the agreed amount must be there, right? I thought it's a principal amount. Out of a principal amount, this.
I'm going to come to how that agreed amount is calculated.
Okay.
Okay. But have you understood now what happens if it's like a moratorium?
Now understood, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
No problem. So is everyone clear with this? What constitutes as default? Yeah. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the premiums or premiums in the CDS. Okay. So in the CDS agreement, premiums depends on survival rate of the entity. What is survival rate? What is survival rate? Company's market capitalization? No. Minimum rate? What minimum rate, Nikhil? It's in the name only, sir. Exactly. Chances of the company existing in the market or surviving in the market. Okay. If the survival rate is high, that means the premiums that are paid in the credit default swap agreement, will it be high or low? Exactly, it will be low. It's inversely proportional. Okay. If the survival rate is low, that means the premiums that are paid will be higher. Okay, it's inversely proportional. Is this clear? So premiums in a CDS, it depends on the survival rate of the company. It's inversely proportional. If this is a junk rated company, then the premiums paid will be higher or lower? High,
Higher.
exactly. If it's a AAA rated company, then the premiums that will be paid is lower. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the agreed amount on default. Okay. This is also referred to as loss given default. For short, it's called as LGD. Okay. How your LGD is calculated is, give me 1 second. So LGD equals 1 minus the recovery rate. What is recovery rate? Recovery rate is the amount the entity or the amount the protection buyer receives from the entity after the default. So in this example, let's say this company defaulted. So as per the rules and regulations, company has to liquidate and it has to pay a certain amount back to the investor, correct? Yes or no? Yes, right? So that amount will be referred to as recovery rate, okay, or recovery amount. So let's say if the recovery amount hypothetically in this example is 100,000, which is equivalent to what percentage of a million? 10%, exactly. 10% of 1 million, which is referred to as the recovery rate. Clear? That means your loss given default will be how much? 1 minus the recovery rate, which is what? 1 minus 10%, which makes it how much? How much will it become, folks? Yeah, 0.9 or 90% of what? 1 million is what the protection seller would have to pay the protection buyer. Is that clear? No, it's not standard. I just took a hypothetical number. Have we understood defaults, premiums, and agreed amount on default, guys? Yeah. So what is left over now is types of CDS. Okay, types of credit default swaps. So we have something called as single, basket, and naked. So single meaning you bought protection on one obligation, like this example here. Okay, single CDS is you bought protection on one obligation. What would basket mean then? Exactly, multiple obligations. Now, does these multiple obligations have to come from one reference entity? No, it can be from multiple entities. Okay. So basket is buying a protection on a pool of obligations, you can say. All right. What is naked CDS? So naked CDS is this. Investor doesn't own the obligation. He's speculating though that the entity will default on the obligation. Okay? With me so far? Investor doesn't own the obligation. He's not holding the obligation. But he's speculating that the entity will default on the obligation. So he goes to a protection seller and enters into a naked CDS agreement where he'll pay him premium or premiums based on the agreement. In return, this guy will pay him a certain agreed amount on default as per the terms and condition. Is this clear? But why? Why? Because the investor is 100% sure the entity will default. So it's going to make some money. And in fact, there is a hedge fund manager who made a lot of money during the 2008 crisis when he bet the opposite way. Sure, Anupam. So naked CDS is, for example, let's say Preeti bought the bond that company A issued. That means now Preeti holds the bond and annually she is receiving coupons on it. Correct? Yeah. Now, let's say Saurav is looking at the bond that company A issued, which is again held by Preeti. He doesn't have the bond, but he's speculating that the company is going to default on that bond. And he's like 100% sure that it's going to default. So what he does is, he goes to an investment bank. He says, I want to enter into a naked CDS. The underlying obligation will be company A's bond, right? I'll pay you some X amount of premium. If my speculation turns right and company A defaults on that obligation, you have to pay me this much amount of money. Now, if the bond defaults, Saurabh receives an agreed amount. Yes or no? Preeti is on her side. She'll have to struggle with the company to get her money back because she's not entered into a CDS. Whereas Saurav has entered into a naked CDS without holding the obligation. Okay. Yes, if they have not hedged again, they can hedge this also, this risk as well. If they want, but that is more of your advanced derivatives, which is not included in your SIPOP class. To tell you, so I have 8 minutes left. To give you an example of a person who's used naked CDS is a guy named called Michael Burry. He was the hedge fund manager of a fund called as Skyon Capital. And what he did was, just before the 2008 crash happened, he took a CDO, which is your credit default obligations, that was discussed in your fixed income class. Remember, I showed you that video, that green color video that you guys had asked you to watch. You remember that? Yeah. So he took actually a CMO, which is called as a collateralized mortgage obligation. And those slices, remember? The safe, okay, risky slice. Yeah. You remember that? Tranches? Exactly, yeah. So what he did was he took one of those slices and he read what all are the underlying mortgages. And he realized the slice made up of bad mortgages and good mortgages. So eventually, when the bad mortgages default, what will happen is the good mortgages also will default. So what he did was he went to like Goldman, JP Morgan, he went to almost most of the big investment banks, and he said, I want to enter into a naked CDS. And the underlying obligations that he gave were all triple A rated obligations. So when you look at it, you're seeing triple A rated obligations. What's the thought in your head? That these guys will not default, correct? Yeah. So the investment banks are thinking this idiot is going to pay us premiums, right? And we don't have to pay him anything. And the amount on which he did a naked CDS was not like small amounts, it was like in billions of dollars. So you can imagine even 1% of a billion to pay as premium is quite a lot of money, correct? Yeah. So what happened was he was 100% sure that the default is going to happen. When he went and did his naked CDS with these big IBs, he only requested one thing. He said that I want it written in the agreement that you will pay me the money on default. And they were laughing and saying, maybe you should write it in the agreement that you will pay as a premium, because the IBs were thinking the obligations he's using or referring, they're all AAA rated. They will never default. He'll end up just paying us premiums and we won't have to pay him anything. So when he entered this naked CDS, his investors in the hedge fund that he was managing, they literally threatened to kill him also, right? But he didn't allow them to pull out their investments. Initially, the fund lost some money because obviously he had to pay the premiums. But once the default happened, he made more than, I think, triple the amount back. And he paid back all of the investors and closed down the fund. How did he anticipate that, Preeti? Watch this movie. John Paulson also did that, but not big shots, the big shot. Okay, so this tells about the couple of people who bet the opposite way and made a lot of money. All right, so that's about it for Too Big to Fail. Talks about Lehman's crashing and how the rest of the investment banks almost crashed.
Ma'am, since this ends part one, can we have like a session next time to kind of catch up with any doubts that we have? Like, especially I have with put options under options, right? So, will there be one like catch up class to clarify doubts?
Yeah, after your Viva is done, right? Your second Viva, based on the futures, forwards, options, swaps, FX, and yeah, you will have, I think, a refresher class. I'm not 100% sure, but I would check with Sadaf. You didn't have a refresher class till now, no? No,
No,
then
ma'am. Till
yeah,
now we didn't.
and then you should have a refresher class if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Tell me.
Yeah, I want to ask like about the one advanced macros and VBA. It's necessary for here in IB.
No.
Advanced macros and VBAs.
No, not necessary. If you want to learn it, it will come in handy, but it's not like a what you say 100% requirement for you to know macros and VBA.
Like for the interview, they will ask or something. They will ask for the Excel skills and anything like that.
No, but they will ask you basic Excel stuff like VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, how to do pivot tables, which
So
will
we have to do it yourself.
yes. So it's better if you learn how to do